What is going on, everybody, and welcome to Turn 2, an MLB betting show presented to you by the GoldSheet and WagerTalk Media. I'm your host, Eric Pauly, the Director of Analytical Content at GoldSheet, and I'm joined by a very special guest today to discuss some over and underperforming teams in Major League Baseball, WagerTalk handicapper Bryan Power. Bryan, thank you for joining me. Welcome to the show. How you doing? What's going on?
Thanks for having me, Eric. Great to be here. Yeah, things are going pretty well, man. Good, solid start to June. 5 straight winning days. Swept the board in baseball last night, 3-0. So sets up this appearance quite well, I would say. That obviously you always want to go 3-0, but before you come on the show, you always want to be able to say that. And going back to October, number one in MLB, still up 72.5 units. We had a tremendous playoff run last year, as everyone remembers, and have kept that right on rolling here through the first 2 months plus of 2023.
Absolutely love that. That is great to hear. Just want to quickly remind everybody that every single day, the GoldSheet MLB stat sheet can be found at goldsheet.com, $15 a week, just $2 a day. Let us do the digging for you for the stats, pitcher hitter splits, advanced analytics, so on and so forth, as well as pick packages available at WagerTalk and sportsrover.com. You can find that at wt.buzz/GS. You can also find Bryan and his plays at wagertalk.com. But Bryan, let's get right into this. We're going to discuss some overperforming and underperforming teams in and around the major leagues. So looking at overperforming first, there are a bunch of teams that come to mind, notably the Miami Marlins, Arizona Diamondbacks, Texas Rangers, of course, even like the Washington Nationals are there. We can go into all these teams now, so probably talk about them ad nauseum. But Bryan, what teams that are overperforming are catching your eye, and which of these overperforming teams do you think actually are maybe a little bit good, actually, despite their preseason having mixed kind of feelings and kind of being down on these teams heading into the season?
All right, well, to answer your second question, let's talk about Texas, right? It's amazing what they've done, 39-20. No one saw that coming. But what's crazy, Eric, is the Rangers actually have 4 fewer wins than expected based on their run differential, which is now, best in all of baseball. Tampa Bay, as you know, had that historically great April from a run differential perspective, wins and losses. Well, and the Rangers have passed them. And the Rangers, what is crazy to me is they are still not being priced like one of the best teams in baseball. They were just a short favorite on the road when they played Detroit. They were a medium-sized favorite when they faced Seattle, and same thing is true against, St. Louis. So they're not even the favorites to win their own division still, despite having the best run differential in all of baseball and the second best record. So, that's pretty crazy. I think, can they keep it going, what they've done? I mean, are they going to average 7.0 runs per game at home for 160? No, for a full, no, they're obviously not going to do that. There could be some plateauing with the Rangers, but they are definitely for real. That run differential says that obviously this is going to be a 90+ win team and they'll be in the playoffs.
So I completely agree that the Rangers are going to make the playoffs. I think that while their offense is undeniable, their starting pitching has been overperforming. Their bullpen, as we can see throughout the course of the season, is definitely not the best in baseball. I think that has a big piece of why they're not even favored to win the division. I'm not personally wouldn't be excited to go bet the Rangers to win the AL West. Houston is still a better baseball team. Do you agree?
The market says so, yes. But I guess it boils down to the fact, or the question, I should say, do you think we've already seen the best of the Rangers? Is it all just sort of like a plateau from here? Do they go downhill from here? You mentioned the rotation. And it's funny, I made the comparison to the Rays earlier, and you talked about the bullpen as well. I think the argument for the Rangers plateauing or maybe trickling down a little bit is similar to what we've seen from the Rays over the last month, right? Injuries in the starting rotation, the bullpen in the bottom third. So they may not be able to maintain what we've seen in addition to the offense. I mean, 6.5 runs per game across the board is ridiculous and can't be maintained either. So if they stop scoring and, the rotation and the bullpen stop overperforming, yes, then we will see some trickle down. And it's interesting, though. I mean, is this the peak of the market on the like? It doesn't look like the peak of the market when you look at the futures, like you mentioned, to win the division, to win the AL, even to win the World Series. They're 4th best odds to win the American League. That's pretty crazy.
I completely agree. And they kind of remind me of last year's Baltimore Orioles team. It's like they continue to win baseball games. Now, this Rangers team, from a metric standpoint, is better than last year's Orioles team, but the market just continued to disrespect the Baltimore Orioles. And I don't have the number exactly in front of me, but on the run line as a dog last year, they just completely cleaned up because the market just never gave them that respect. Now, I think it's a little bit different with the Rangers because while, like you mentioned, they're not getting priced as one of the elite teams, they still are favorites against teams like the Cardinals, who are obviously struggling, Mariners as well. The Detroit Tigers, I remember when they were minus 130 the first game of that series, I didn't bet it because I was like, there's got to be something there. And it's just not the Rangers. Yeah, certainly could be better than minus 130 against the Tigers. But last point on Texas. So I think that their starting rotation that they've done, Nathan Eovaldi, John Gray, they've really pitched very well. Of course, Martin Perez, the veteran there. But Jacob deGrom on the 60-day IL, how important is it if he can come back and even if we're talking in mid-September to give them a couple starts to end the season and maybe into the playoffs, or just considering deGrom's history, you can't really count on even that at this point?
I mean, you can't count on it. I mean, if he's back, then all of a sudden, yeah, this team is live in the playoffs. No doubt about it. It's interesting to note that Dane Dunning, who replaced him, the Rangers have lost two of their last three losses overall are with Dunning on the mound, and they've lost, Dunning's last two starts. So that's something to keep an eye on if you're looking at the Rangers to just bet against them in a spot that Dunning, who is deGrom's fill-in, they are 0-2 the last two times he started.
Totally agree. So now let's flip over to the National League West, talk about the Arizona Diamondbacks. Second place in that division, playing some great baseball with a lineup that is just Corbin Carroll, the rookie, is just playing out of his mind. Their starting pitching has been doing well enough to keep them afloat, but similar to the Rangers, of course, this Arizona lineup is not as good as the Rangers lineup, but is this rotation and more importantly, this bullpen good enough to keep Arizona not only in the NL West hunt, but in the NL wildcard hunt for the remainder of the season? What do you think there, Brian?
Well, Arizona, like Texas, is a team that I did think would improve coming into the year. Texas, I should have mentioned this earlier, with the elimination of the shift, they were one of the teams clearly earmarked to improve in that regard. And also, they had poor luck in one-run games last year, the Rangers. Now, Arizona, you talk about the team speed. They're excellent in the field. I'm actually showing some value still, minus 125 to make the playoffs, mainly because the National League is just so depth shy right now, isn't it? I mean, other than the Braves and Dodgers, who are you really confident in that league to make the playoffs? And you look at Arizona, they've already got a great head start. They're, I believe, like 10 games over 500, tied with the Dodgers for first place. You mentioned Carroll. And the starting rotation, they have two excellent starters with Kelly and Gallen. So, that can carry you a long way in a league where there's just not a lot of standout teams. I know the Padres, we'll talk about them probably a little bit, but they're going to get better maybe, but you can't necessarily assume that. So the D-backs are very well positioned, I think, right now, moving forward.
I think so too, but I think that matchup against the Atlanta Braves this past weekend, of course, Arizona, I think they won one of those games, but the game that they lost was on a walk-off grand slam. I think that was kind of the showing exactly what the flaws of the Diamondbacks can be, right? Like they can hang around with a team like the Atlanta Braves and probably the Dodgers for 6-7 innings, but they don't have any high leverage arms. They don't have any relievers who are really going to close the door on these great offenses, like again in Atlanta, a Los Angeles, a San Diego if they do get hot, even in New York Mets if they do. Francisco Lindor kind of figures it out a little bit, but I am very concerned just about their bullpen. It's like time and time again, this has kind of been the difference between teams winning and losing. Like obviously, if you have three great starters in the playoffs, that's a really, really big advantage because if they can go 7+ innings, that's really just, you're shortening the game. So that's huge for them. But not having relievers, I think is going to be the demise of Arizona. And they're also a team like Texas that is a year ahead of their rebuild at this point. Now, I agree with you that I expected both of these teams to be better than their win totals projected them to be coming into this year, but they weren't supposed to be this good at this point, right, Brian?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I don't think anyone would have imagined, a first place tie, especially because, as we've both hit on, San Diego was the favorites to win this division. And right now, They're kind of starting to get it together, but they've been MIA, certainly, and underperforming at the top of that division. So no one would have thought coming into the year Arizona would be better than third in this division. And the Giants are pretty good too. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be a slug. I just think the key is, and I know there's one National League team we might hit on here in a moment, it's just so depth shy, this league. There's just not to get to 6 teams. You put a gun to my head, and I hope you wouldn't, but the Padres and Mets probably do make a run, and then you've maybe got the current division leaders in Arizona, and there's your 6. I mean, I don't know who else you're going to make an argument for.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the Phillies playing some bad teams. Washington, now they help in Detroit. They're looking like this great team, but do we really want to back the Phillies? I mean, we saw what they did last year with that momentum, and we've seen what momentum can do in baseball in general, like with the Nationals a few years back. Teams that just get hot, they can ride that momentum, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. But things that you'll never really notice and understand this point in the season because they're not apparent, they don't exist yet. But as we know, things can really turn quickly. But last team for overperforming, unless you have another one, but a team I wanted to talk about, the Miami Marlins. Now, like you said, I think it's a great point. The lack of depth in the National League. There were just a lot more bad teams than there are good teams looking around. And I don't want to say bad teams. I want to say more like middle of the pack, because there's no Oakland Athletics in the NL, despite how bad maybe the Rockies really are. But I'm really impressed with Miami's first-year manager. Their pitching staff continues to perform well, even though their Cy Young winner is probably the worst starter on that rotation at the moment, which is a crazy thing to say. And though their offense is kind of very reliant on the home run ball, which is not a great recipe moving forward because you want to be able to manufacture runs in more ways, I was down on Miami coming to this year. I bet they're under win total. I have egg on my face right now. But Brian, are they going to continue to play well, or is Miami going to come back down to earth sooner than later?
Okay, I think we all know where the discussion centers around with this Miami team. It's their run differential, right? And the run differential says, no, they will not be able to sustain this. They're 16-4 in one-run games, I believe. Well, how many did they win in a row without a loss? Was it 12 or 13 they got to? It was something crazy like that. It was an MLB record. Yeah. And, the Marlins are hoping for a repeat of what the Mariners did 20 years ago. In 2021, 2 years ago. That is win 90 games despite a minus 51 run differential. That's not really something any team obviously aspires to. It's hard to do. It's funny. You mentioned this. The best time to bet against the Marlins this year has been when Alcantara has been on the mound. There's 4-8 in his 12 starts. They're down 6.4 units with him on the mound, and his numbers. It's not like bad luck. He's just pitching poorly. But, I'm a big believer, Eric, in run differential, scoring differential in any sport being a great predictive metric. And the thing with this Marlins team is, okay, they're 16-4 in one-run games. When they're not winning by one run, they're like 17-24, and their run differential would be like third worst in baseball, only ahead of the Royals and, of course, the historically inept A's. So, again, it's a depth-shy league, so they've got a shot. Right now, they're one of the top 6, but I'm not a believer in this team. I mean, it's a hard blueprint. They've been so reliant on the one-run win, and when they lose, they get blown out. And history suggests that's not a recipe for success.
Yeah, I completely agree. Part of the reason why I bet this Miami team to go under their win total, I think it was at 77.5 before when I bet it at the start of this season. And these one-run games are killing me there. This is going to make us an ultra sweat. It's going to come down to the wire. But I completely agree. Like, part of the reasons why I dislike this Miami team, they're showing me time and time again that they're not good. However, sometimes the new manager is pulling the right strings, putting in the right relievers, making the right calls throughout the course of the game. That's keeping Miami in this thing, and it's in turn leading to them winning these games, which there's certainly a lot of luck involved. But just like with the Rays to start the season and with Miami now, once you win these games, it doesn't matter how you win them, whether they're against bad opponents like the Rays did to take advantage to start the season, or in these one-run, close, lucky kind of games. These are just wins in your back pocket that when things do get tough at the end of August, beginning of September, the fact that you had these serious wins against these bad teams and these wins piled up are going to help you in the playoffs or in making a case for a playoff race. So totally agree with you there. Brian, any last team you want to touch on before we go to some teams that are underperforming their expectations so far?
Yeah, just one last note, though, on the Marlins, and to your point about wins in the bank. As depth shy as the National League is, this team's Miami's 11-2 in interleague games. Now, some of that is who they face. They've gotten to face both Oakland and Kansas City, which really helps. But the bottom line is, I don't think the National League, you're going to find many teams doing that well in interleague play. So that helps Miami as well. The last team I want to mention in terms of overperforming would be the Pittsburgh Pirates. This team that lost 100 games each of the last 2 years. They had the worst record in baseball in that condensed 2020 season. They had a minus 226 run differential last season. I mean, nobody would have expected this team to be fighting for a pennant. The key was, again, the start in April. No team got more quality starts out of its rotation. And you look at this rotation for the Pirates, Eric, and that was shocking, considering some of the names. I mean, you've got 43-year-old Rich Hill, Velasquez, who's been hurt, but Velasquez, his ERA was like a full point lower than it's been any year in the last 7 years. This is a team where I do not think it's sustainable at all moving forward, and I do expect them to fall off even in a division that's very bad. And we're going to talk more about the NL Central, I think, moving forward, because I think there's value on one team that has a poor record right now. But the Pirates are a team that has overperformed the first 2 months, and I don't think can sustain it, because the rotation, outside of Mitch Keller, who's tremendous, I wouldn't be fading him, but everyone else is not very good in that rotation.
Couldn't agree more. You have Rich Hill right now, 43 years old, with a 40% K rate, slicing and dicing batters like it's 2000. That's when you know, but I couldn't agree more. Kind of the reason why I overlooked this Pirates team is because I don't think that they're have a chance whatsoever. I would take the Reds personally at this point in time to end the season with a better record than the Pirates. If anybody has odds on that, please let me know where to find that, because I would take a look into that market, because NL Central, terrible. And we'll get to talking some more NL Central right now. But let's look at some teams underperforming. I guess this is just a great segue to talk about the St. Louis Cardinals. They fell victim to the Texas Rangers last night on a walk-off hit. And something that I was watching that game, and the St. Louis Cardinals just ran themselves out of the top of the ninth inning. They had a double. They had poor base running, ended up getting out where they should have been leading that game 4-3, or at least had runners on the corners or second and third with one out and had the chance to, take a bigger lead. Instead, they line up the flips to the bottom of the ninth. Rangers take that win and walk it off. But Cardinals, yeah, they have their woes with their pitching staff, but while I do think that there's the most value in just taking the Cardinals to win the Central, like I think they have the most playoff appearances in the National League in the last decade and a half, and they have the lineup. It's no secret that this team should be able to be better than they are, but do you really think this rotation is fixable, or this pitching in general, their bullpen as well, is fixable?
I don't know. Look, first of all, I had Texas last night, so I was very happy to see that. I was like, oh my goodness, they're going to blow this. Because that was one of those stinky lines, right? We talked about Texas, how they're priced. It's like, my goodness, Texas is only, I got them at minus 132, I think, which is awfully cheap. But the thing with the Cardinals, they've scored more runs than they've allowed this year. So they should not be 11 games under 500. They have like this bizarrely poor record in night games compared to they're pretty good. They have a good record in day games, but their night games record, and that seems totally random, right? It's not like they see the sky getting dark and all of a sudden they forget how to play baseball. It just seems very random to me that the Cardinals would be poor in night games. So we talked about the NL Central being wide open, and I think you mentioned the price. I believe it is plus 900 right now on the Cardinals to win that. Or no, it's plus 450 to win that division. They actually second best odds to win that division. I think there's value simply from the perspective of who else do you believe in? And that's a pretty nice price. We talked about Pittsburgh. We don't like them. The Cubs are kind of in the same boat as the Cardinals, where they probably should have more wins, but I'm not a believer in the Cubs vis-a-vis the Cardinals. Mm-hmm. The Reds, okay, I'm with you that the Reds can be better than the Pirates. I don't think the Reds are going to win the division. And that leaves you with Milwaukee, who I bet against last night and has like a minus 20 run differential despite, being tied for the division lead. Milwaukee was a slight underdog yesterday at Cincinnati, despite winning the first 3 games of that series and facing a pitcher in his big league debut. I had the Reds in that game. I like to have its chances. So this is a division that is just wide open. And if you're going to take a flyer in any division, it should be this one. And I just think it's got to be the Cardinals. I know they've dug themselves a big hole. I know there's questions in that rotation, but plus 450 is a pretty good price for a team that has scored more runs than they've allowed this year, I think.
I completely agree. Like you mentioned, it's like, do you really want to put your faith in Chicago Cubs, whose bullpen is worse, probably the worst in that division? Well, probably outside the Reds. The Reds, the youth movement is going to be fun. Don't get me wrong. I'm very excited for when they finally put Encarnacion Strand, Ellie De La Cruz, some other pitchers that they have onto that team. That's going to be very exciting to watch. We're going to expect a team of all rookies and people on one-year contracts to really win and make some noise in the National League. Well, I mean, the Central's the best division to do it, but it's highly unlikely. And looking at the Milwaukee Brewers, I want nothing to do with that team. They're an all or nothing. They score 5 to 7 runs or they score 0 to 1 runs, and that's just not a formula for success. But let's stick in the National League because the wild card's obviously going to include probably if the Cardinals don't win the division or even any of those teams we just mentioned in the NL Central, they're going to have a hard time getting into the wild card considering that Diamondbacks are playing well. Of course, you have the Mets, the Marlins playing well. Phillies, you can't really always just count out. Another team you can't really just count out is the San Diego Padres. Now, I was high on the Padres for obvious reasons coming into the season because of how good that their lineup is, but something that I didn't note, and it has been kind of showing, not as much as I really expected, but their starting rotation really is not that great. But if you told me now, 60 games in, that the problem would be that this lineup is just so hot and cold that would be the biggest problem for the Padres, I wouldn't have thought that was the case. So what are you seeing with San Diego, Brian, that's making you believe that, like, obviously they are underperforming, but what are you seeing with this team, and do you see a bounce back in their future in terms of maybe run differential or any other metrics that you've been eyeing?
Yeah, I mean, they've scored more than they've allowed this year. There's been a recent turnaround, and I mean, they were priced the way they were preseason for a reason, right? I mean, you saw, how the lineup looks on paper. I mean, it's hard for me to believe that a team that had such high expectations would just go 500. In lieu of like some like catastrophic injury or something like that. And again, I go back to what we talked about with Arizona, how depth shy the National League is. The books still believe in San Diego. I think San Diego they're a favorite to make the playoffs. I know they're higher than minus 110 still, despite the record.
And minus 125 to make the playoffs is the best price available.
Okay, minus 125. So, I mean, it's not a great price right now, obviously, but again, I said it earlier, put a gun to my head. I think they're going to make the playoffs, even if it's the third place team in their own division. I guess, there's nothing specific other than, well, we all thought they were going to be really good and they've underperformed so dramatically. That's what it boils down to. It's nothing. I mean, when you look at how they've actually played this season, there's not really a ton to hang their hat on. It's sort of like, well, we thought they were going to be really great, and it's insane that they're just this mediocre. I think that's what you're looking at with them, which is dangerous.
Yeah, yes, it's definitely dangerous because it's not something that you can fully put your finger on. It's like you saw, I don't know if you did see, but Juan Soto in an interview 2 days ago, they asked him flat out, like, what's wrong with the offense? And he said, I don't know. Don't ask me. I have a 900 OPS. Like, why are you asking me? There's some guys. Then you look at the team. I mean, you have Matt Carpenter batting 170 on there. You have Rod, I can't pronounce his first name, but Odor in that lineup. You got Gary Sanchez just DFA twice, and now he had a dinger last night, and I think he's got 2 for the Padres now. But, like, I don't know that how well it's going to turn out. Machado's not hitting well, but obviously I expect to bounce back from him. Soto's been doing Soto things. Bogart's being in and out of the lineup a little bit, maybe has something to do with it. And, of course, now Tatis back in full force. But something you can't put your finger on with that Padres team because they should be better than they are. They refuse to be better than they should be for whatever reason, not just this year, kind of over the last couple of years. They've been paying this big money, and they made the playoffs. Of course, did beat the Dodgers in the playoffs last year, but they're still little brother on the West Coast there. There's no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say that it's not the first time that they've, struggled, obviously. Yeah.
Of course. So now let's swing on over to the American League, AL Central, 2 teams. Now, Chicago White Sox doesn't need to be said. This isn't as surprising as it should be. Like, their win total was only to be a 500 team this year. Now they're, a bunch of games below 500. And it's not just how they're losing games, right? So say they were like the opposite of Miami, having unluck in 1-run games, and that'd be upset. But, like, their lineup can't hit. Like, their middle of their order does not do anything for them. Their fielding is atrocious. Their lack of general effort is there. So, Brian, are you really surprised that White Sox are bad? I mean, they were a very popular pick to progress and positively regress because people thought they underperformed last year. But, like, were they ever really going to be good this year? Because the early signs are saying that if you thought that they were going to be good, like, you were kind of maybe just overthinking it. This is just a bad ball club.
Yeah, I was never a huge buyer on this team, even in a division. It's the central divisions in both leagues are obviously the weak divisions. But even so, no, I was not a huge buyer on this team. Now, plus 900, I have seen some people say looks pretty attractive to win this division. If you're looking to make that bet, I guess from a value perspective. But the thing is, I don't like the White Sox. It's just basically, if you're making that bet, I think the mindset has to be, well, if it's not the Twins, who else is it? The Royals are the second worst team in baseball. The Tigers are a bottom 5 team in baseball. The Guardians can't hit. And so, if you think the Twins are going to slip up, really the only team that I guess probably has an argument to catch them is the White Sox, but I actually don't see that happening at all. There's a reason they're priced so far out. I would be shocked if this team rallied to win the division or even make the playoffs. Certainly their only path is to into the playoffs is probably to win the division.
Yeah, and that's really going to be the case for any of these AL Central teams. The only path in is a division. But I completely agree with you, the White Sox. I've watched them play. I've lost my hard-earned money on them a few times this season. I don't do bad lists for obvious reasons. You're going to have some spots, pricing rules, everything. So that's going to determine what wager you place. But definitely not dying to put money on the White Sox anytime soon. But a team in that same division that I would actually argue is the best shot of reaching and taking over the spot for the Twins. Only 3.5 games back right now, despite how poorly they played. Now getting their best pitcher now back. He pitched Tristan McKenzie, he pitched Gem in his first start back. Obviously, this team has issues offensively. They also have issues in the rotation. Shane Bieber is not that guy anymore. They're back of the rotation. They're trying to mix and match some younger players. It has not worked out well, but I see value in the Guardians plus 420 to win the Central. Am I crazy, Brian, or how are you viewing this?
Well, I live in Cleveland. Last 2 times I've gone to see the team, they have scored a grand total of 0 runs in those 2 games. They have issues at the plate. But you mentioned McKenzie coming back. Bivey's not bad, and they need that because, coming into the year, there were a lot of signs that Bieber was going to regress. Same with Cal Quantrill, too, right? Cal Quantrill was unbeatable at home, and that seemed more just random than anything else. So those were 2 fade pitchers. They may trade Bieber. The talk around here is they may trade Bieber because they're obviously the Guardians are a notoriously cheap team, and they probably shouldn't re-sign Bieber for what he's going to command on the marketplace. So trading him now and getting a prospect haul is probably the best move. Do they have a better shot than the White Sox of catching the Twins? Maybe. I actually just don't see either team doing it, though. I actually think the Twins may have this. It's crazy because the Twins are only 2 games over 500, but I've really never been more confident in a team 2 games over 500 to win its division in June than the Twins, because I just think all those other teams are so flawed in the AL Central.
Yeah, no, I completely agree because the Twins, their flaws, they're striking out is their inability to make contact sometimes, leading the league in strikeout rate against right-handed pitching, sometimes just looking absolutely lost there. But the way that their pitching staff has been performing is really incredible. So, and just breaking it down, I have it right in front of me. Only 3.5 games back are the Guardians, only 5.5 are the White Sox. You have Detroit in the middle there, 4 games back. I would have loved to see if Detroit had some of those pitchers that got not hurt this year, because I think they could have made some noise, but obviously we'll have to worry about them next year. Any last team that you really want to touch on? I know we can also talk maybe a little bit about Seattle, though they're kind of heating up a little bit lately, but they're going to have a long way to catch. The Angels, I still think, are fraud, so I wouldn't even consider them over or underperforming. I think they're kind of performance expected. Any last-ditch teams here that you're thinking before we get out of here?
Seattle's a team I did not believe in coming to this year. They had overachieved wildly. I mentioned what they did in 2021 earlier. They kind of did the same thing last year. Their record in 1-run games in 21 and 22 was just outrageous. So I think what the Mariners are right now is what they're going to be the rest of the season. A 500-ish team that actually has a pretty strong run differential, but underperforms. Last team is Toronto. I do worry about this. Is a team that a lot of people expect to make the playoffs, obviously. I do worry about them, though, because they are in the toughest division in baseball. And I know I like Gausman a lot, but he can't carry. He only pitches, once every 5 days or whatever. I mean, I don't like Berrios, and Alek Manoah is an absolute disaster. I bet against him yesterday with the elimination of the shift. He appears to be a little heavier this year. Maybe we all are. Coming into 2023, I'm not one to throw stones, but I just don't think Toronto right now is a team that I would want to bet on. They're minus 160 to make the playoffs. That's, whew. You really got to like them, I think, to bet them at this price, even if the market respects them that much.
Yep, considering, of course, obviously Texas and Houston, one of those teams are going to have to make a wild card spot. And then obviously the Orioles, Blue Jays, Rays, Yankees, all in that mix. And you and I can easily do a show just debating the AL East and who's going to make the AL playoffs. So we have a whole 30-minute conversation about that. So could definitely be on the agenda moving forward. But Bryan, that was awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Tell everybody where they can find you quickly before we get out of here.
Yep, WagerTalk.com is the place. Again, 5 straight winning days to open June and 3-0 Monday. So a solid start to the week and going all the way back to last year's playoffs. Number 1 in MLB at WagerTalk, up 72.5 units. So feeling good. Expected to continue that. Going to have a strong rest of the month and strong rest first of the half of the baseball season. Thanks for having me, Eric.
That is awesome, Bryan. For me, you can find all my content at GoldSheet.com as well as the GoldSheet Daily MLB Stat Sheet. Let us do the work for you in finding all these advanced analytics, pitcher, batter splits, so on and so forth, every single day directly to you. You can also find our pick packages on WagerTalk and SportsRumor.com. Today we actually have a 4% top selection going, so very exciting stuff. But on behalf of myself and Bryan and the whole team at GoldSheet and WagerTalk, we thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you, and we'll see you guys next time.